The silver-etched blade of a royal guard sliced through a hanging vine just inches from Alara Hunt's throat, the steel whistling a death knell in the damp night air. She didn't breathe. She couldn't. The moss beneath her palms was slick with the blood of a forest that had turned predatory, and the rhythmic thump-thump-thump of armored boots against the earth sounded like a countdown to her own execution. She had come to the forbidden forest of Oakhaven to find her brother, Leo, to pull him from the clutches of the shadows that had swallowed him whole 3 nights ago. But now, the shadows were the only things keeping her soul tethered to her body. "Spread out," a voice hissed, jagged and cold as mountain ice. "The beast is wounded. He couldn't have gone far. And if you find the human girl sniffing around where she doesn't belong, silence her. We can't have witnesses to the king's accident." Alara's heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. The king? She wasn't looking for royalty. She was looking for a boy who still left his wooden toy knights under the kitchen table. But as a flashlight's beam swept across the trunk of the ancient oak she was crouched behind, a massive, calloused hand suddenly clamped over her mouth. The heat of the palm was startling, feverish, pulsing with a raw electric energy that made the hair on her arms stand up. Before she could let out a muffled scream, she was yanked backward into the hollow of a rotted cedar tree, her back pressed firmly against a chest that felt like solid granite. "Stay quiet," a voice growled directly into her ear, the vibration of it rattling her very bones. It wasn't a human voice. It was a low, melodic rumble of thunder, laced with an agonizing strain. "Stay quiet or they'll discover us." Alara froze. The scent of cedar, crushed pine needles and metallic blood overwhelmed her senses. She looked up, her eyes adjusting to the suffocating dark of the hollow, and met a pair of glowing molten gold embers. It was him. The nightmare whispered in every tavern from the borderlands to the capital. The Lycan King Julian Thorne. But the monster wasn't lunging for her throat. He was bleeding from a jagged silver gash across his shoulder, his fingers trembling slightly as he kept her pinned to him, his eyes fixed on the gap in the wood where the guards, his own men, were patrolling with murder in their eyes. In that breathless, terrifying moment, the reality of the forest shifted. The guards weren't the protectors of the realm tonight. They were the hunters. And the monster wasn't the predator, he was the prey. Alara realized with a jolt of pure adrenaline that she had stumbled into a regicide in progress, and the only thing standing between her and a shallow grave was the very creature she had been taught to fear since birth. Hello to every single one of you joining us today. I'm so incredibly glad you're here for this journey. Whether you're snuggled up in a rainy London flat watching from the sunny coasts of Australia, or tuning in from the heart of the United States, welcome to the channel. How are you all doing today? I hope your week has been filled with peace, but if you're looking for a little bit of a thrill to escape into, you've certainly come to the right place. Before we dive deeper into the shadows of the Forbidden Forest to see if Alara and the Fallen King can survive the night, please take a quick second to check if you've hit that subscribe button. It truly helps us keep these stories alive, and we have so many more emotional roller coasters planned for you. If you're already part of the family, thank you for your incredible support. Now tell me in the comments, where are you watching from today? I love seeing how far our stories travel. As the guard's footsteps faded into the distance, Julian didn't let go. His hand remained over Alara's mouth, his thumb brushing almost inadvertently against the curve of her cheek. He was staring at her, not with the hunger of a wolf, but with the desperate, haunted look of a man who had lost everything in a single stroke of betrayal. "Why are you here, little human?" he whispered, his golden eyes narrowing. "Do you have a death wish, or are you just another pawn sent to finish what they started?" Alara felt the sharp edge of a question that would change her life forever. If she spoke, she linked her fate to a dying king. If she fled, she'd be hunted by the men who were supposed to save her. Why was the king of the Lycans hiding from his own blood? And more importantly, as she felt the heat of his body against hers, why didn't she want to run away? The silence that followed the retreating guards was heavier than the noise of their hunt. Julian Thorne didn't pull his hand away immediately. His fingers lingered, a rough, calloused heat against Alara's skin that felt less like a threat and more like an anchor. When he finally retreated, he collapsed back against the jagged interior of the hollow cedar, a low, guttural hiss of pain escaping his throat. Alara scrambled to the edge of the shadows, her breath coming in ragged hitches. She looked at him, really looked at him. In the stories told by the village elders of Oakhaven, The Lycan King was a titan of fur and fong, a mindless beast who drank the marrow from the bones of the innocent. But the man, or creature, before her was devastatingly human in his agony. His hair was the color of a raven's wing, matted with silver-tinged blood that shimmered unnaturally in the moonlight. His chest, bare and scarred from a lifetime of battles she could only imagine, heaved with the effort of staying conscious. "I asked you a question, girl," Julian rasped, his voice a jagged edge of velvet and gravel. He clutched his side where a silver-tipped bolt had grazed his ribs. Silver was poison to his kind, a slow-burning acid that turned the blood to lead. "Why are you in the Forbidden Forest? Did Silas Vane send you to finish the job? Is a silver dagger hidden in those trembling hands?" Elara felt a spark of indignant fire cut through her terror. She was a village healer's apprentice, a girl who spent her days pressing herbs into poultices and her nights staring at the tree-line, waiting for a brother who never returned. She didn't have room in her heart for palace coups. "I don't know who Silas Vane is," Elara snapped, her voice shaking but defiant. "And I don't care about your crown or your kingdom. I'm looking for Leo. My brother. He's 19, he has a gap between his front teeth and he's been missing for 3 days because he followed a shimmer into these woods. If you've eaten him, King, then you might as well kill me now because I'm not leaving without him." Julian's golden eyes flickered, the predatory glow dimming into something akin to weary recognition. He let his head thud back against the wood. "Leo? The boy with the blue tunic? The one who thought he could track a moon stag?" Lara's heart stopped. She lunged forward, forgetting the danger, and grabbed Julian's blood-stained sleeve. "You saw him? Where is he? Is he alive?" Julian looked at her small, pale hands against his dark skin. The contrast was startling, vulnerability meeting raw, broken power. "He was alive when my captain, Gideon Brooks, took him to the Blackwood outpost. Gideon told me the boy was a spy. I believed him. I have been a fool for many things lately, it seems." The revelation hit Elara like a physical blow. Her brother wasn't just lost. He was a prisoner of the very guards who were currently trying to assassinate their own king. The stakes had just tripled. She wasn't just a girl lost in the woods anymore. She was the only person who knew that the king lived, and the king was the only person who knew where her brother was being held. "Gideon Brooks," Elara whispered, the name tasting like ash. "He's the one leading the search party out there. He's the one who said you went mad and slaughtered your own council." Julian let out a bitter, jagged laugh that turned into a cough. "I loved Gideon like a brother. I gave him the command of the Iron Guard. And he repaid me by sliding a silvered blade into my back during the moon feast. He doesn't want me dead because I'm a monster, Elara. He wants me dead because I was going to sign the peace accord with the human territories. He wants war. He wants blood. And your brother. Your brother saw Gideon meeting with the rebel lords. That's why he's in a cage." Elara sank onto her heels, the damp earth soaking into her skirt. She looked at the king, the brutal monarch, and saw a man betrayed by his closest confidant. She saw a ruler who wanted peace, being hunted by those who craved the chaos of the old ways. "You're dying," she observed, her healer's instincts finally overriding her survival instincts. She reached into the satchel at her hip, pulling out a small vial of crushed marigold and yarrow. "Don't touch me," Julian warned, his canine teeth lengthening instinctively as the wolf within him sensed a threat. "My blood is toxic right now. If the silver reaches my heart, I'll shift and I won't be able to control what I do to you." "Then it's a good thing I'm the best healer in Oakhaven," Elara said, her voice steadying. "If you shift, the guards will hear the bones breaking and they'll find us in minutes. If you want to live long enough to take back your throne and give me my brother, you're going to let me clean that wound." She moved closer, the heat radiating from him like a furnace. As she peeled back the scorched fabric of his shirt, she saw the true extent of the cruelty. The silver was turning his veins black, a web of darkness spreading across his ribs. Julian watched her, his breath hitching as her cool fingers brushed his skin. For a moment the king of the Lycans looked terrified, not of the death following him through the trees, but of the strange, soft kindness of the girl in front of him. "Why help me?" he whispered, his voice losing its edge. "I am the monster of your nightmares, Elara Hunt." Elara looked up, her face inches from his. "The monsters I saw out there were wearing human faces and royal capes. You're just a man who's been stabbed in the back. And I've always been better at fixing broken things than running away from them." Are you feeling the tension yet? The betrayal of a best friend is a wound that silver can't even compare to. I'm curious, have any of you ever been completely surprised by someone you thought you knew? It's a pain that changes you forever, just like it's changing Julian right now. If you're enjoying the way Alara is standing her ground against the Lycan King, let me know in the comments. And if you haven't yet, hit that notification bell so you don't miss the moment they have to make their move. As Alara worked, the forest outside seemed to groan with the weight of the conspiracy. Every snap of a twig made them both flinch, but in the small, cramped space of the cedar tree, a different kind of bond was being forged. One of shared survival and a desperate, flickering hope. Alara knew that once the sun rose, the hunt would intensify. Gideon Brooks wouldn't stop until he saw Julian's head on a pike. And Julian? He looked at Alara with an intensity that made her pulse race. Not with fear, but with a realization that this human girl was the only thing standing between him and total darkness. If we survive the night, Julian murmured, his hand twitching toward hers but stopping just short of contact, I will burn the Blackwood outpost to the ground to find your brother. You have my word as a king. I don't need a king's word, Alara replied, tying the bandage tight. I need the word of the man who's hiding in a tree with me. Julian's gaze softened, a small, weary smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. Then you have it, Alara. On my life. But as the wind picked up, carrying the distant howl of a wolf that didn't sound like a friend, they both knew that staying quiet was no longer going to be enough. The hunt was evolving, and the secrets of the forbidden forest were about to get much more lethal. The moon reached its zenith, casting long, skeletal shadows across the forest floor, when the first scream echoed through the trees. It wasn't the scream of a beast but the shrill, agonized cry of a man. Julian's eyes snapped open, the molten gold of his irises flaring with a predatory intensity that made Alara's breath hitch. He surged to his feet, despite the silver poisoning still coursing through his veins, his hand instinctively going to the empty sheath at his hip. That was one of the scouts, Julian whispered, his voice low and vibrating with a primal frequency. Something is out there. Something that isn't my men and isn't a wolf. Alara felt the temperature in the cedar hollow drop 10 degrees. What do you mean? What else lives in these woods? Before he could answer, a heavy thud vibrated through the earth, followed by the sound of metal rending, like a suit of armor being peeled open like a tin can. Then a scent hit them. It wasn't the metallic tang of blood or the musk of the Lycan. It was the smell of ozone and rotting lilies. The shadow stalkers, Julian hissed, his face pale. Gideon didn't just betray me. He's made a pact with the Voidwalkers. He's using forbidden sorcery to ensure I never leave these woods. Suddenly, the side of the rotted cedar tree exploded inward. A mass of shifting, ink-black smoke solidified into a humanoid shape, its face a featureless mask of white bone. It didn't use a sword. It moved with elongated, obsidian claws that dripped a viscous, corrosive liquid. Alara screamed as a claw lunged toward her throat, but Julian was faster. With a roar that shook the very leaves of the forest, the king lunged. He didn't shift fully. The silver in his system made a complete transformation agonizing, but his muscles swelled, his claws extended, and his jaw sharpened into a lethal weapon. He tackled the shadow creature, slamming it against a tree with enough force to crack the trunk. Run, Alara! Julian roared, his voice more beast than man. Run to the clearing near the Iron Brook. Don't look back. I'm not leaving you, she shouted, grabbing a heavy, jagged branch from the floor. She watched in horror as two more shadows drifted from the canopy, their movements fluid and unnatural. Julian was fighting with a desperate, suicidal ferocity, but he was weakened. One of the stalkers slashed his thigh and he went down on one knee, a snarl of pain tearing from his lungs. Blair didn't think. She didn't calculate the odds. She drove the jagged branch into the back of the stalker leaning over Julian. The wood passed through the smoke-like body, but the physical impact was enough to distract it. Julian seized the opening, grabbing the creature's throat and crushing it until it dissipated into a cloud of foul-smelling mist. He stood up, swaying, his chest heaving. He looked at Alara, his expression a mix of fury and something that looked suspiciously like awe. You're a fool, he breathed, catching her arm as they broke into a sprint through the underbrush. And you're a king who can't even win a fight without a village girl, she retorted, though her heart was hammering against her ribs so hard she thought it might shatter. They crashed through the foliage, branches tearing at Alara's skin and hair. Behind them, the sounds of the forest had gone deathly silent, replaced only by the rhythmic shush-shush of the shadows gliding through the air. As they reached the edge of the iron brook, the water shimmering like liquid mercury under the moonlight, Julian suddenly pulled her behind a massive boulder. He pressed her back against the cold stone, his body shielding hers. "Listen to me," he whispered, his face inches from hers. The urgency in his eyes was intoxicating. "The Blackwood outpost is 3 miles north. If we stay on the path, the stalkers will find us. We have to cross the brook and go through the Whispering Caves." "But the legends say no one comes out of those caves," Alara whispered back, her eyes darting to the dark maw of the cavern across the water. "The legends were written by people who didn't have a Lycan King to guide them," Julian said. He reached out, his hand cupping the side of her face. His touch was no longer feverish. It was steady, a grounding force in the middle of a nightmare. "Alara, if we do this, there's no turning back. You'll be a traitor to the crown in the eyes of the world. Why are you still standing by me?" Alara looked into those golden eyes and saw the truth. He wasn't just a king, he was the key to finding Leo. But deeper than that, she felt a pull she couldn't explain. A magnetic, dangerous attraction to the raw honesty in his gaze. "Because the world is wrong about you," she said softly. "And because I think you're the only person who can help me find the one person I have left." Julian's gaze darkened with a sudden, fierce emotion. He leaned in, his forehead resting against hers for a fleeting, electric second. "Then we move. Now." But as they stepped into the shallow, icy water of the brook, a voice rang out from the tree-line, a voice Alara recognized. "How touching," Gideon Brooks sneered, stepping into the moonlight. He wasn't alone. Behind him stood a dozen royal guards, their crossbows leveled at Julian and Alara. The king and his little human pet. "I wondered where you'd crawled off to, Julian." "I should thank the girl. She left a trail of medicinal herbs a mile wide." Gideon smiled, a slow, cruel twist of his lips. "Kill the girl first. I want the king to watch her die before I take his head." "No," Julian roared, stepping in front of Alara as the first bolt hissed through the air. I cannot believe Gideon would use Alara's own healing trail against her. Talk about a knife to the heart. This is the moment where everything changes, where the hunt becomes a war. How many of you saw that betrayal coming from the shadows? And do you think Julian can protect her against a dozen crossbows while poisoned? Drop a Team Alara in the comments if you think she's got a trick up her sleeve. And please, if you're enjoying this, subscribe and join our community. We're just getting started. The bolt didn't hit Julian. It didn't hit Alara. As the trigger clicked, the water of the iron brook suddenly surged upward, a wall of freezing liquid rising like a shield. The bolt was caught in the torrent, spinning harmlessly away. Julian didn't hesitate. He grabbed Alara around the waist and dived into the surging water. The brook. Alara gasped as they were swept away by a current that shouldn't have been that strong. It's moving on its own." Julian held her tight, his arm like a band of iron around her. "It's the forest's ancient magic. It knows its true king is in danger." As they were dragged into the darkness of the Whispering Caves by the churning water, the last thing Alara saw was Gideon's face, contorted in a mask of pure, unadulterated rage. They were alive, but they were now trapped in the bowels of the earth, and the real mystery of why Leo had been taken was about to be revealed in the most terrifying way possible. The current spat them out onto a jagged subterranean bank like two drowned rats, gasping for air in a world where the sun was a forgotten myth. The Whispering Caves lived up to their name. The wind whistling through the porous limestone walls sounded like 1,000 voices mourning a lost age. Alara coughed up a lungful of river water, her body shivering so violently her teeth rattled. Beside her, Julian was in worse shape. The plunge into the icy iron brook had slowed the silver poisoning spread, but the physical toll was visible. He lay on his back, his skin deathly pale, his chest barely moving. "Julian." Alara crawled to him, her fingers numb as she fumbled for his pulse. "Don't you dare die on me now. You still owe me a brother." His eyes flickered open, the gold dimmed to a dull amber. "The water, it's sanctified," he whispered, his voice a mere shadow of its former power. "The old magic, it's still here. Gideon, he can't follow us into the deep stone. The shadows can't breathe in the earth's marrow." "Then we have a head start," Elara said, trying to sound braver than she felt. He looked around. The cavern was illuminated by patches of bioluminescent fungi that glowed a soft, ghostly blue. But we need to move. If we stay here, the cold will kill us before the guards do. She helped him sit up, and the proximity sent a jolt of heat through her that had nothing to do with the environment. As she slung his heavy arm over her shoulder, the raw power of him, even in his weakened state, was overwhelming. They began a slow, agonizing trek deeper into the caves, their shadows stretching like giants against the walls. As they walked, the tension shifted from the fear of being caught to the strange, burgeoning intimacy of their forced proximity. Julian looked down at the small woman supporting his weight, her brow furrowed in concentration, her wet clothes clinging to her frame. "You're different from the humans I've met at court," Julian murmured, his breath ghosting over her ear. "They usually bow and tremble, or they sharpen knives behind their smiles. You just keep walking." Elara wiped a smear of mud from her forehead. "I'm a hunt, Julian. My father was a woodsman and my mother was a midwife. We don't have time for bowing. We're too busy surviving. Besides, it's hard to be intimidated by a king who's leaning on me for support." Julian let out a dry, rasping chuckle. "Fair point. But why risk it? When Gideon cornered us, you could have surrendered. You could have told him I kidnapped you. He would have spared you." Elara stopped, turning to face him in the blue-lit gloom. Her eyes were fierce. "He would have killed me the moment I became inconvenient. But more than that, I saw the way you looked at those stalkers. You weren't just fighting for yourself. You were trying to keep them away from me." She stepped closer, her hand resting on the bandage she'd applied earlier. "I might be a little human, but I know the difference between a monster and a man who's been forced to wear a mask. My brother Leo. He saw something he shouldn't have. He's a good kid, Julian. He's all I have. If Gideon is using dark magic, then Leo is in more danger than I thought." Julian's expression darkened. If Gideon has accessed the void, he isn't just looking for a throne. He's looking for the Lycan stone. It's a relic buried beneath the Blackwood outpost. Can turn my entire race into mindless, thrall-like soldiers. If he uses it, your brother and your entire village will be the first to fall. The weight of the revelation pressed down on them. This wasn't just a rescue mission anymore. It was a race to stop a magical genocide. As they moved deeper, the whispers of the cave grew louder, forming coherent thoughts in Elara's mind. Betrayer. King. Blood. Love. She shook her head, trying to clear the fog. "The cave plays with your mind," Julian warned, his grip on her shoulder tightening. "It feeds on your deepest fears. Don't listen to the voices, Elara. Focus on me." "I'm trying," she whispered, but the cave was showing her images now. Shadows of her brother Leo screaming in a cage, shadows of Julian turning into a beast and tearing her apart. To break the spell, Julian did the one thing he hadn't dared to do. He stopped and pulled her into his chest, his arms wrapping around her with a protective, desperate strength. He tucked her head under his chin, his heartbeat thudding against her ear, fast, rhythmic, and undeniably alive. "Listen to my heart," he commanded. "That is the only truth in this cave. Not the whispers. Not the shadows. Just this." Elara closed her eyes, her hands gripping the fabric of his tunic. The fear began to recede, replaced by a thrumming attraction that made her skin tingle. She looked up at him, and for a moment the distance between a human girl and a Lycan King vanished. The air between them was thick with more than just cave mist. It was charged with a magnetic, forbidden pull. Julian leaned down, his lips inches from hers, his golden eyes searching hers for permission. But then a low, rhythmic sound echoed from the darkness ahead. Fick, fick, fick. It wasn't a voice. It was the sound of 1,000 tiny legs scuttling across stone. "Red herrings," Julian hissed, pulling back and drawing a small silver dagger he'd kept hidden in his boot. His only weapon against the things that lived in the dark. Gideon didn't just send stalkers. He stirred the cave crawlers. "I don't know about you, but my heart is racing." That moment between Elara and Julian was so intense, and then of course the forest or the cave had to ruin it. It's always the way, isn't it? Just when you think you're safe enough to catch your breath, the world throws 1,000 scuttling legs at you. What do you think? Is Julian's secret dagger going to be enough? Or is Elara going to have to use her healer's knowledge in a way she never expected? Let me know your theories in the comments below. And hey, if you're rooting for Julian and Alara to make it out of this cave in one piece, make sure you've subscribed. We're moving into the heart of the mystery next, and you won't want to miss the twist that's coming. The blue light of the fungi began to flicker as the crawlers, pale, blind arachnids the size of hounds, emerged from the ceiling. They didn't have eyes, but they sensed the heat of the two warm bodies in the cold dark. "Stay behind me," Julian growled, his body coiling like a spring. "If any get past, use the marigold oil in your bag. It's caustic to their skin." "Julian, there are too many," Alara cried as the first wave lunged. As Julian fought with a feral, wounded grace, Alara realized that the caves weren't just a path, they were a test. And as she watched the king bleed for her, she knew she wasn't just standing by him for her brother anymore. She was standing by him because the thought of him falling was a pain she couldn't endure. But as the battle raged, a sudden blinding light erupted from the end of the tunnel, and a figure emerged that made both Julian and Alara freeze in shock. "Enough," a voice commanded, and the crawlers instantly retreated into the cracks of the stone. The figure stepped forward, and Alara's heart nearly stopped. It was a woman, dressed in the tattered remains of a royal gown, her eyes the same molten gold as Julian's. "Mother," Julian whispered, his voice cracking. "The queen is dead," the woman said, her voice hollow. "But the secret she died for is very much alive. And it's the reason your brother was taken, Alara Hunt." The air in the cavern became impossibly still, the only sound the frantic thrumming of Alara's pulse. The woman standing before them was a ghost in silk and shadow. Julian took a stumbling step forward, his hand reaching out as if to touch a mirage. "Queen Selena Thorne," Alara breathed, her voice barely a whisper. "But the history books say you perished in the Great Fire of the North Citadel 10 years ago." Julian saw it happen. "Julian saw what Silas Vane and Gideon Brooks wanted him to see," the queen replied, her golden eyes fixed on her son with a mixture of profound love and crushing regret. She didn't look like a monster. She looked like a woman who had been hollowed out by time. "They didn't kill me. They realized that a dead queen is a martyr, but a hidden queen is a source of infinite power." Julian's face went through a kaleidoscope of emotions: shock, hope, and finally a cold, sharp fury. "Power? What are you talking about, mother? Why are you down here in the dark while Gideon burns my kingdom to the ground?" Selena stepped into the blue bioluminescence, and Alara gasped. The queen's arms were covered in glowing, etched runes, the same ozone-scented sorcery the Shadowstalkers used. "I am the battery, Julian. The Lycan stone isn't just a rock found in a mine. It is a catalyst that requires the blood of the first royal line to remain active. Gideon didn't just want the throne. He wanted to harvest the essence of our blood to create an army that never tires, never feels mercy, and never dies." She turned her gaze to Alara, and her expression softened into something terrifyingly sad. "And that brings us to your brother, Alara." Alara felt the world tilt. "Leo? What does a human boy have to do with Lycan blood magic?" "The prophecy of the stone," Selena said, her voice echoing off the limestone walls. "It requires a tether. A soul of pure, untainted human light to balance the dark energy of the Lycan essence. Without a human tether, the stone consumes its wielder. Gideon has been searching for years for a human with the specific lineage of the old woodsmen, those who once protected the forest. Your family, Alara. The Hunt bloodline." The revelation hit Alara like a physical blow. Her brother wasn't just a witness. He was a component. A piece of a machine designed for slaughter. "He's the tether," Alara whispered, her knees buckling. Julian caught her, his grip firm and steadying. "He's not in a cage because he saw a meeting. He's in a cage because they're going to drain him." "They have already begun," Selena said, her voice trembling. "The eclipse is tomorrow night. When the moon is obscured, the veil between our world and the void is at its thinnest. That is when Gideon will bind Leo's soul to the stone. Once that happens, Leo will be gone and Gideon will be a god of shadows." Julian's grip on Alara tightened. The silver poisoning in his veins seemed to flare in response to his rage, black veins pulsing at his neck. "Then we stop it. We go to the outpost now." "You are too weak, Julian," his mother said, stepping forward to touch his face. "And the outpost is guarded by 3,000 men who think you are a traitor. But there is another way. A way that Gideon doesn't know." She looked at Alara. "The tether works both ways. If a human of the same blood enters the stone's radius, they can disrupt the flow. You can save him, Alara, but it will require you to step into the very heart of the void energy. It could kill you. Or it could change you into something neither human nor Lycan. Julian swung around, his eyes blazing. No. I won't let her. She's already done enough. This is my war, Mother. My crown. It ceased to be just your war the moment they took my brother. Alara shouted, her voice echoing with a power that surprised even her. She pushed away from Julian, standing tall despite her trembling limbs. She looked at the king, the man she was beginning to realize she would follow into the mouth of hell, and then at the queen who had survived a decade of torture. Julian, look at me, Alara commanded. He met her gaze, his breath hitching. You told me to listen to your heart. Well, listen to mine. It's beating for Leo, but it's also beating because I refuse to live in a world where men like Gideon win. I'm going. With or without you. In that moment of shared vulnerability, the air between them seemed to combust. Julian reached out, his hand tangling in her damp hair, and pulled her into a fierce, desperate kiss. It wasn't the romantic kiss of a fairy tale. It was the kiss of two people standing at the edge of an abyss, tasting of salt rain and a defiant, burning passion. When he pulled back, his forehead rested against hers. If you go, I go. We'll burn that outpost to the ground together. Can you believe the scale of this betrayal? It's not just a coup, it's a magical harvest. The fact that Alara's family has been the target all along adds such a devastating layer to her journey. She thought she was an outsider, but she's the key to the whole kingdom. I have to ask, if you were Alara, would you risk your soul to save your brother, or would you try to find another way? This is where the stakes get as high as they can possibly go. Leave a comment with your thoughts, and if you're as gripped by this as I am, make sure you've shared this with a friend who loves a good twist. But as the three of them prepared to move, a low, rumbling vibration shook the cavern. Dust filtered down from the ceiling, and the blue fungi flickered out into total darkness. They found us, Selena hissed, her hands beginning to glow with a sickly violet light. Gideon used the stone to track my energy. He's collapsing the cave. Go. Julian roared, grabbing Alara's hand. Mother, come with us. I am bound to this place by the stone's anchors, Julian, Selena said, a peaceful, tragic smile on her face. I will hold the ceiling up as long as I can. Go to the outpost. Save the boy. Save our people. Mother, no. Julian screamed, but a massive slab of limestone crashed down between them, sealing the queen behind a wall of impenetrable rock. The cave began to groan and twist. There was no time for grief. There was only the hunt, the stone, and the ticking clock of the eclipse. They were headed toward their darkest hour, and the man Alara loved was losing his battle against the silver in his blood. The exit of the Whispering Caves didn't lead to salvation. It led to a nightmare. Alara and Julian stumbled out onto a jagged ridge overlooking the Blackwood outpost just as the sky began to bruise with the first signs of the coming eclipse. The air was unnaturally cold, a biting wind whipping Alara's tattered clothes. But it wasn't the weather that made her blood turn to ice. It was the sight below. The outpost, once a simple military garrison, had been transformed into a fortress of shadow. A pulsing violet light emanated from the central courtyard, casting long, sickening ripples across the stone walls. Thousands of Lycan soldiers stood in eerie, perfect formation, their eyes glowing not with natural gold, but with a vacant, hollow purple. The stone, Julian whispered, his voice a jagged ruin. He collapsed against a frozen pine, his face gray. The silver poisoning had reached his neck, black veins crawling toward his jawline like a spider's web. He's already activated it. My people, they're gone, Alara. They're husks. Alara knelt beside him, her heart shattering as she saw him struggle to even lift his head. The man who had moved like lightning in the forest was now fading before her eyes. They aren't gone, Julian. Your mother said it's a tether. If we break the connection, they'll come back. She reached for her satchel, but her hands shook so violently she spilled her remaining herbs into the snow. I have to find a way to neutralize the silver. If I can just... Alara, look at me. Julian's hand, cold and heavy, caught her wrist. He looked at her with an intensity that felt like a final goodbye. There is no time for medicine. The eclipse begins in an hour. You have to go. You have to infiltrate the outpost while I draw their fire. You can't even stand, she cried, tears blurring her vision. You'll be slaughtered before you reach the gates. It doesn't matter, he rasped, a single tear tracking through the grime on his cheek. As long as you get to Leo. As long as you survive. I was a king who failed his people, Alara. Let me be a man who saves the woman he loves. The word love hung in the air, a beautiful tragic note in the middle of a symphony of destruction. Alara leaned forward, pressing her forehead against his, her breath hitching. You are not leaving me. We are the only two people left who know the truth. If you die, Gideon wins. The world goes dark. Suddenly the ground beneath them shuddered. From the outpost, a rhythmic booming sound began, the beat of a drum made of bone. The ritual, Julian breathed. Below them, a cage was being hoisted onto a central dais near the glowing Lycan stone. Inside, a small, terrified figure huddled against the bars. Leo. Alara's scream was swallowed by the wind. Through the distance she saw Gideon Brooks approach the cage. He held a jagged obsidian blade that pulsed in sync with the stone. He wasn't just going to kill Leo, he was going to sacrifice him to the void to cement his rule forever. But the horror didn't stop there. Gideon looked up toward the ridge as if he could sense their presence. He raised his hand and a squad of those purple-eyed thrall-like lichens began to scale the cliffs with unnatural jerky speed. Go! Julian commanded, shoving her toward a narrow ravine that led toward the outpost's rear drainage tunnels. I'll hold the ridge. I'll give you every second I have left. Julian, no. Run, Alara. For Leo. For me. With a roar of pure, agonizing will, Julian Thorne forced himself to his feet. He let out a howl that sounded less like a king and more like a wounded god, his body beginning to shift. A forced, painful transformation that cracked his bones and tore his skin as he fought the silver to protect her one last time. Alara turned and ran. She ran until her lungs burned like fire, until her feet were numb, and until the sound of Julian's desperate battle on the ridge was drowned out by the thundering of the ritual drums. She had never felt more alone. The man she loved was sacrificing himself to a horde of monsters, and her brother was minutes away from having his soul extinguished. The situation was hopeless. She was a village girl with an empty satchel and a broken heart, standing against an army of the undead. I don't think I've ever written a scene that felt this desperate. Seeing Julian force a transformation while poisoned, just to give Alara a chance. It's the ultimate sacrifice. And poor Leo seeing his sister so close yet so far. How are you guys holding up? I'm genuinely emotional just thinking about Alara running through those dark tunnels alone. Do you think she can find the inner strength to face Gideon without Julian by her side? Drop a comment and let me know if you're rooting for a miracle. And if you haven't subscribed yet, please do. You need to see how this ends. Alara scrambled through the filth of the drainage tunnels, the smell of sulfur and decay filling her nose. She emerged into the heart of the outpost, hidden behind a stack of iron crates. The courtyard was a sea of violet-eyed soldiers. In the center, the Lycan stone sat atop a pedestal, humming with a sound that made Alara's teeth ache. Leo was being pulled from his cage, his eyes wide with terror as Gideon gripped his hair, forcing his head back to expose his throat. Behold! Gideon shouted to the mindless masses. The tether is set. The sun dies and a new empire rises. The moon began to slide over the sun, casting the world into a sickly, artificial twilight. Alara looked at the stone. She looked at her brother. And then she looked back at the ridge, where the golden flashes of Julian's eyes had finally gone dark. She was at her breaking point. She had nothing left, no weapons, no king, no hope. But then she remembered the queen's words. The tether works both ways. She didn't need a sword. He was the weapon. The world went cold. As the moon's shadow bit into the sun, the violet glow of the Lycan stone intensified until it was a blinding, jagged scar in the center of the courtyard. Alara stood in the shadows of the iron crates, her breath hitching as she watched Gideon press the obsidian blade against Leo's skin. Please. Leo's voice was a thin, fragile thread. Alara. Help me. Gideon laughed, a sound devoid of humanity. She isn't coming, boy. Your sister is likely being torn apart by the very king she tried to save. You are the only thing left of your line and soon, you won't even be that. Alara felt a wave of despair so heavy it nearly crushed her. Julian was gone. The ridge was silent. She was just a girl from a village who knew how to dry herbs and stitch wounds. What could she possibly do against a sorcerer and an army? But then she felt a strange vibration in her chest. It wasn't her heartbeat. It was a resonance, a low humming frequency that matched the pulsing of the stone. The Hunt bloodline. Her mother's stories of the old woodsman weren't just folklore, they were a roadmap. Her family hadn't just lived in the forest, they had been its heartbeat. The tether works both ways. Elara closed her eyes. She didn't think about the guards. She didn't think about the fear. She thought about the way Julian's hand felt against her cheek. She thought about the warmth of his heart beating against her ear in the cave. She realized that she wasn't just standing there to save her brother. She was standing there because she had finally found something worth dying for. She stepped out from behind the crates. Gideon, her voice rang out, amplified by the unnatural silence of the eclipse. The traitorous captain froze, his head snapping toward her. The purple-eyed soldiers turned in unison, their movements synchronized and terrifying. Well, the healer survived. Kill her, Gideon commanded, his voice bored. 2 Lycan thralls lunged toward her, their claws extended. But Elara didn't run. She didn't flinch. She reached out with her mind, searching for that violet hum in the air, and instead of pushing it away she pulled. I am the tether, she screamed. As the Lycans reached her, a shock wave of pure white light erupted from Elara's chest. It wasn't the sickly violet of the void. It was the gold of a summer sunrise, the color of Julian's eyes. The soldiers were thrown back by the sheer force of the energy. The Lycan-tide stone began to shriek, the violet light flickering as it struggled to process a different kind of power, the power of a soul that wasn't being sacrificed but was offering itself. Gideon recoiled, shielding his eyes. What is this? Stop her. But Elara was already moving. With every step she took toward the stone, the gold light grew brighter. She saw the connections now, shimmering threads of shadow linking the stone to every soldier in the courtyard. And at the center of it all, a thick black cord was wrapped around Leo's heart. Leo, look at me. Elara shouted, her eyes glowing with an intensity that rivaled the king's. Don't look at the blade. Look at me. As she reached the dais, the air became thick as honey. Gideon swung his obsidian blade at her, but the golden aura around her acted like a shield, the blade shattering upon impact. At that moment, a thunderous roar echoed from the gates. The heavy iron doors of the outpost didn't just open, they were blasted off their hinges. A massive, silver-furred wolf, larger than any Elara had ever seen, burst into the courtyard. His fur was matted with blood, and his side was a mess of silver-burned flesh, but his eyes were pure, unmistakable gold. Julian. He hadn't died. He had survived the silver, survived the fall, and survived the army. He had shifted fully, the bond between them acting as a beacon that pulled him back from the brink of death. The king lives, one of the few soldiers not yet turned into a thrall screamed, the spell on the army beginning to waver as the true monarch reclaimed his ground. I have goosebumps. The moment Elara realized she was the weapon, not with a sword but with her soul, is everything. And Julian? Coming through those gates like a force of nature? That is the definition of a king. Can you imagine the look on Gideon's face right now? He thought he had one, but he forgot one thing. You can't break a bond that's forged in blood and sacrifice. Do you think Julian and Elara can finish this together? Let me know in the comments if you cheered when Julian burst through those doors. And if you're new here, hit that subscribe button. The final confrontation is about to begin and it's going to be legendary. Julian leaped onto the dais, his massive jaws snapping inches from Gideon's throat. Gideon scrambled back, reaching for the stone, desperate to draw more power to shield himself. It's over, Gideon, Elara said, her voice calm and steady. She stood between the stone and her brother, her hands resting on the pulsing surface of the relic. She felt the darkness of the void trying to eat into her skin, but she didn't fight it with hate. She fought it with the memory of the light. She poured her love for her brother, her grief for the queen, and her budding, fierce devotion to Julian into the stone. The violet light began to turn gold. The black cords connecting the soldiers began to snap. One by one, the Lycans dropped to their knees, the purple fading from their eyes, replaced by the confusion and clarity of men waking from a nightmare. No! Gideon screamed, his face contorting. It's mine. The power is mine. He lunged for Elara, but he was too late. The eclipse was reaching totality, and in that moment of perfect darkness, the only light in the world was the gold radiating from the healer and her king. The turning point had passed. The prey was now the hunter, and the king had returned to claim his throne. The sky was a bruised, hollow purple as the moon completely devoured the sun, leaving only a shimmering, ghostly ring of fire in the heavens. But on the courtyard floor, the darkness was being torn apart by a radiant, blinding gold. Gideon Brooks was backed against the edge of the stone dais, his face a mask of sweating, desperate terror. The Lycan stone beneath Alara's hands was no longer humming. It was screaming. The structural integrity of the relic was failing as Alara's pure human essence collided with the corrupted void energy Gideon had stuffed into it. "You're destroying it!" Gideon shrieked, his voice cracking like dry parchment. "That stone is the heritage of 1,000 years. You're throwing away the power to rule the world." "I don't want to rule the world, Gideon," Alara said, her hair whipping around her face in a magical gale. She could feel the skin on her palms blistering from the heat, but she didn't let go. "I just want my brother back. And I want you to answer for what you've done." Julian, in his massive silver-furred wolf form, let out a low, predatory growl that vibrated the very stones of the outpost. He circled Gideon, his golden eyes fixed on the man who had been his closest friend and his greatest betrayer. With a sudden, blur-like motion, Julian lunged. Gideon pulled a hidden silver dagger, the twin to the one that had poisoned Julian in the forest, and slashed blindly. The blade bit into Julian's shoulder, but the king didn't flinch. He pinned Gideon to the stone floor with a massive paw, his teeth bared inches from the traitor's throat. "Julian, no!" Lair cried out. "If you kill him in cold blood while the stone is active, his soul will be absorbed into the void. It will only make the stone stronger." Julian froze. Even in his beast form, the struggle was visible in his eyes. Every instinct told him to rip the throat out of the man who had tried to steal his kingdom and murder the woman he loved. But he looked at Alara, glowing, sacrificial and fierce, and he saw the leader he was meant to be. He wasn't a butcher. He was a king. He retracted his claws and shifted back into his human form in a flurry of silver mist. He stood over Gideon, naked and scarred, but radiating a power that no crown could ever provide. "I won't give you the mercy of a quick death, Gideon," Julian rasped, his voice thick with authority. "You will live to see the peace you tried to destroy. You will watch from a dungeon as I sign the accord." But Gideon, driven mad by the loss of his godhood, let out a jagged laugh. "Peace? There is no peace without the stone. If you won't use it, then no one will." With a final, suicidal surge of strength, Gideon kicked out at the pedestal. He didn't aim for Julian or Alara. He aimed for the hairline fracture Alara had created in the Lycan stone. Prick. The stone shattered. A shockwave of pure, unadulterated void energy erupted from the center of the dais. It was a vacuum of light, a black hole that threatened to swallow everything within the outpost walls. Leo was thrown backward, sliding toward the edge of the platform. "Leo!" Alara screamed, reaching for him, but the gravity of the collapsing stone was pulling her in the opposite direction, into the heart of the rift. This was the final twist. The destruction of the stone didn't end the danger. It created a doorway to the void that was hungry for a sacrifice. Gideon was the first to be taken. He didn't even have time to scream as the black tendrils wrapped around his waist and pulled him into the nothingness he had tried to master. Alara felt her feet leave the ground. She was being dragged toward the rift. She looked at Julian, her heart breaking. She had saved her brother and she had saved the king. If this was the price, she was ready to pay it. "Save him," she shouted to Julian, pointing at Leo. "Keep him safe." Julian Thorne didn't listen. He didn't go for Leo. He knew the boy was far enough from the event horizon to be safe. He lunged for Alara. He caught her hand just as her body was halfway into the swirling black mist. "I am not losing you again," Julian roared. The silver poisoning in his system, the last remnants of it, seemed to react to the void energy. The black veins on his neck flared, and then in a blinding flash of irony, the void began to suck the silver out of his blood. The poison was being drawn into the rift, leaving Julian's blood pure and his strength renewed. With a heave that shattered the stone beneath his feet, Julian yanked Alara back from the abyss. At the same time he grabbed the largest shard of the shattered stone, the core, and slammed it into the rift like a plug. The light that followed was more intense than the eclipse. It was a roar of white, a deafening silence, and then nothing. I am literally shaking. The way the void took the silver out of Julian's system as it tried to pull Alara in. That's the kind of poetic justice you only see once in a lifetime. They fought the darkness, and the darkness ended up curing the king. Tell me honestly, did you think Alara was going to be lost to the void? I was holding my breath. This is the triumph we've been waiting for, but the journey isn't quite over. We still have to see the aftermath of the battle and if Julian can truly lead a broken kingdom. Drop a King Julian in the comments to celebrate his recovery. And if you haven't subscribed yet, you're going to want to see this final conclusion. When the dust settled, the courtyard was silent. The eclipse was ending, the sun's first true rays peeking over the horizon like a promise. Alara lay on the ground, gasping for air. She felt a pair of strong, warm arms wrap around her. She looked up and saw Julian. He was no longer pale, no longer dying. He looked like the legend he was always meant to be. "Leo," she whispered. A small, sobbing figure ran toward them, throwing himself into Alara's arms. "Alara, you did it. You really did it." She held her brother tight, burying her face in his hair. She had done the impossible. She had entered the forbidden forest as a girl looking for a lost boy, and she was standing in the ruins of a coup as the savior of a race. Julian stood up, offering his hand to Alara. As she took it, the thousands of Lycan soldiers in the courtyard, now free from the stone's influence, dropped to one knee. Not out of fear and not out of magic. They bowed out of respect for the king who had bled for them, and the human girl who had given them back their souls. The first true sunrise after the eclipse didn't just bring light. It brought a stillness that the kingdom of Oakhaven hadn't known for a generation. The air, once thick with the scent of ozone and betrayal, now smelled of damp earth and the sweet, lingering perfume of mountain jasmine. 3 months had passed since the walls of the Blackwood outpost witnessed the fall of a tyrant and the rise of a legend. In the heart of the capital, the great hall of the citadel was filled with people. Not just Lycans but human delegates from the borderlands, including the elders of Alara's own village. They were all gathered for the signing of the Sun and Moon Accord, a treaty that would finally tear down the walls of the Forbidden Forest and unite the two races. Alara Hunt stood on the balcony overlooking the bustling courtyard, dressed in a gown of deep emerald silk that matched the vibrant life of the forest she had once feared. She felt a presence behind her, a familiar, grounding heat that made her heart skip a beat before she even turned around. "The delegates are waiting, Alara," Julian said, his voice now a warm, resonant rumble without a trace of the silver's rasp. He looked regal, dressed in his ceremonial furs and gold-embossed leather. But when he reached her side, the king vanished, leaving only the man who had shared a hollow tree with her. "Let them wait another minute," Alara smiled, leaning back against his chest. "I was just thinking about Leo. He's currently in the royal gardens, trying to convince a group of Lycan pups that he can track a moon stag better than they can." Julian laughed, a rich, genuine sound that echoed through the stone corridor. "He'll be a better scout than Gideon ever was. He has the heart for it. And he has his sister's stubbornness." He turned her in his arms, his golden eyes, now bright and clear, searching hers. "Are you happy here, Alara? I know this isn't the quiet life of a healer's apprentice you once had." Alara reached up, her fingers tracing the faint, silvery scar on his shoulder where the void had pulled the poison from his blood. It was a reminder of the price they had paid and the miracle they had received. "I'm still a healer, Julian," she whispered. "I'm just healing a kingdom now instead of a village. And as long as I'm with you, I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be." The bond between them, forged in the whispering caves and tempered in the fires of the eclipse, had only grown stronger. It wasn't just magic. It was a choice they made every day. Julian had kept his word. He had hunted down the remnants of the conspiracy, but more importantly, he had spent every day proving to his people and to Alara that a king's true strength lay in his vulnerability. "I have something for you," Julian said, pulling a small wooden box from his belt. Alara opened it to find a pendant carved from a single shard of clear quartz, the only piece of the Lycantide stone that hadn't turned to dust. It no longer pulsed with violet light. Instead, it held a soft, steady golden glow, mirroring the energy Alara had channeled during the battle. "It's no longer a weapon," Julian murmured, fastening it around her neck. "It's a promise that the darkness will never find us again." They stepped back into the great hall together, hand in hand. As they approached the massive oak table where the accord lay, a woman stepped out from the shadows of the pillars. Queen Selena, though frail and still recovering from her years in the caves, stood with a dignity that silenced the room. She looked at her son and the human woman at his side, and for the first time in a decade she looked at peace. She stepped forward and placed her hand over theirs as they signed the document. The room erupted into cheers, a sound of unity that shook the very foundations of the citadel. The forbidden forest was forbidden no longer. It was a bridge. As the sun reached its peak, Elara looked out at the horizon where the trees met the sky. She thought of her journey, from the terrified girl hiding in the moss to the woman standing beside a king. She had lost her fear, but she had found her soul. The story that began with a whisper of "stay quiet" had ended with a roar of freedom. And as Julian pulled her close for a celebratory kiss in front of the cheering crowd, Elara knew that their story was only just beginning. What an incredible journey we've been on together. From the dark hollows of a rotted tree to the golden halls of a united kingdom, Elara and Julian have shown us that even in our darkest hour, love and truth are the only lights that truly matter. I want to thank you all so much for sticking with this story until the very end. It's been an absolute joy to bring these characters to life for you. Before you go, I have one last question. What was your favorite moment? Was it the first kiss in the cave, or Julian's epic return through the gates? Let me know in the comments below. And if you haven't already, please subscribe and hit that notification bell. We have so many more emotional, high-stakes stories waiting for you. Until next time, keep looking for the light in the shadows.